If he scored 600, she would score 610. If he pushed himself to 610, she immediately hit 620. Her score was always exactly 10 points higher than his. Yet, whenever he missed an exam, his sister's grades plummeted instantly, confirming his suspicion. His sister's success was tethered to his own. With that realization, a daring plan began to take shape. What if, during the college entrance exams, he managed to score above 740? What would happen then? As the exams approached, he lived like an ascetic monk, while his sister, Lin Xiaoxiao, chose the path of pure pleasure. Relying on him, she became utterly lawless, even abandoning her studies to party with friends. Whenever she was caught, she looked annoyed, rolling her eyes and slamming her phone on the table. She told them to stop bothering her, claiming the top spot in the exams was already hers. And to be honest, he didn't let her down. He rewarded her misplaced trust by securing her the top rank in every mock exam. He wanted her intoxicated by this false sense of glory. While in the shadows, he edged closer to a score of 741. The final semester felt like a dull blade slowly carving away at his nerves. He woke at 5 and slept at midnight, spending every waking moment between meals and basic needs grinding through practice problems. He locked himself in a sunless little room, operating with the precision of a machine that simply refused to stop. In the next room, he could hear Xiaoxiao's laughter during video calls or her exaggerated gasps while binge-watching dramas. Sometimes she turned the volume up on purpose, as if flaunting her freedom. But he didn't care, not anymore. He had learned to block out the noise, with only one number looping in his mind, 741. That figure was like a nail driven into his heart. Whenever he felt like giving up, he pressed against it. The pain kept him sharp. By March, Xiaoxiao began entering his room frequently. At first, he thought she was just looking for something, but then he noticed a shift. Her gaze became scrutinizing, almost testing him. Once, while he was solving a complex math problem, she pushed the door open and stood behind him, staring at his scratch paper for a long time. She asked why he was working so hard lately. Without looking up, he simply replied that the exams were coming, so hard work was only natural. Xiaoxiao leaned in closer, trying to see his work, noting he had never been this obsessed before. His heart skipped a beat, but he maintained a calm facade. He sighed and put down his pen, pretending to be exhausted, claiming his parents were forcing him to aim for a top-tier university. He told her they'd cut off his allowance otherwise. Hearing this, Lin Xiaoxiao's expression relaxed, and a slight smirk even began to creep across her face. You, at a top university? She mocked before turning to leave, not forgetting to throw one last jab about not overworking. She reminded him the top spot would be hers anyway. He watched her leave in silence, only picking up his pen once the door clicked shut. A faint smile touched his lips. He needed her to keep up that contempt. The more she looked down on him, the safer his plan remained. But Xiaoxiao's suspicion hadn't vanished entirely. Over the following days, we see her constantly probing his progress, asking which subjects were hardest. She kept asking for his mock exam scores, sometimes intentionally saying discouraging things to shake his confidence. He, however, was ready for her. During every mock exam, he carefully controlled his scores to stay in the top 5, high enough to be natural, but not enough to stand out. His true trump cards remained hidden. The most difficult problems and complex techniques were reserved for his private, late-night practice sessions. After finishing, he would tear his scratch paper into tiny pieces and flush them away, leaving no trace of his true level behind. One evening, while he was working on advanced competition problems, he heard voices in the living room. It was his mother and Xiaoxiao talking. He cracked the door open just a sliver to listen. His mother was worried, wondering if he was pushing himself too hard in that room. Xiaoxiao simply laughed it off, asking her mother what there was to worry about. To her, his effort was nothing more than a tool. She boasted that no matter what he scored, she would always be 10 points higher. His hard work only guaranteed her a better result. His mother agreed, praising her daughter's intelligence and deciding to let him keep grinding away as if he were merely Xiaoxiao's servant. Listening to this, he clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. Yet, outwardly, he remained perfectly calm. He quietly closed the door and returned to his problems. Then, on a night in April, he heard a faint sound outside his room. He listened intently. They were footsteps, very light, as if someone was trying desperately not to be discovered. And then, the doorknob began to turn with agonizing slowness. He realized instantly that she was spying on him. He didn't turn around. He continued to pretend he was focused, but he had already swapped his advanced work for a sheet of basic, ordinary practice problems. The truly advanced materials had long been locked in the deepest part of his drawer. As the door creaked open a tiny sliver, he caught a glimpse out of the corner of his eye. He saw half of Lin Xiaoxiao's face peering in, her eyes scanning the papers on his desk. He let out a deliberate sigh and began muttering to himself. He complained about getting another problem wrong, lamenting how difficult it was, before closing his notebook and slumping onto the desk to pretend he was resting. The door quietly shut. As her footsteps faded into the distance, he sat up and let out a cold laugh. He knew that the more Xiaoxiao guarded against him, the more it proved her own insecurity. Deep down, he knew she understood better than anyone that those scores weren't hers. She was merely a parasite. Without him, she was nothing at all. We moved to the May mock exams, where he scored 695 points while Xiaoxiao took first place in the grade with 705. On the day the results were released, She celebrated grandly at home. Her parents hovered over her with endless praise, claiming she brought glory to the Lin family, while the table was filled with her favorite dishes. He sat in the corner quietly eating his rice, as invisible as a ghost. His father put down his chopsticks, looking at Xiao Xiao with a face full of pride. He told Xiao Xiao she had performed well and that if she maintained this, the college entrance exam was a sure thing. His daughter, he claimed, was simply brilliant. His mother chimed in, boasting that it was all thanks to their superior genes, her voice carrying a sense of pride she couldn't even begin to hide. Xiao Xiao shot him a smug look, a mocking smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She told her brother he needed to work harder so the gap wouldn't be too embarrassing. He gave a simple grunt of agreement without offering any rebuttal, continuing his meal in silence. To be honest, there was nothing left for him to say. Inside, however, he was laughing coldly. He wanted her to enjoy this moment to the fullest, for he knew it would be her final highlight. That night, he tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep as his mind repeatedly rehearsed every single thing that could happen during the 2 days of the entrance exams. The June exams arrived exactly as scheduled. Under the guise of an early celebration, Xiao Xiao spent the previous evening out with friends. His mother didn't stop her. Instead, she handed her a stack of cash, telling her she'd worked hard and deserved to relax. He watched this through the door crack. He felt no emotion, only a sense of profound irony. While she was out, he went to bed at 8 o'clock, setting his alarm for 6 the next morning. Lying there, he felt strangely calm, like a swordsman waiting for the moment to draw his blade. All his endurance would finally be rewarded tomorrow. He woke up on time the next morning, ate a few bites of breakfast, and headed out. His mother took Xiao Xiao to her center, only giving him a perfunctory good luck. He nodded without saying much, thinking to himself that this was the final time. From now on, their paths would never cross again. He arrived at the exam hall. We find him at the school's old teaching building, assigned to a window seat on the 3rd floor where the sunlight streams in perfectly. He sits down, meticulously arranging his stationery. Taking a deep breath, he closes his eyes and whispers a silent reminder to himself. Lin Feng, you have been waiting 18 years for this very day. As the bell for the Chinese exam rings out, he flips open the paper. In that moment, his mind is clearer than ever before, and every question feels familiar. They are like old friends. He anticipates every trap in the reading comprehension, and the essay topic happens to be a type he has practiced countless times. His pen moves as if guided by a higher power. Once the exam ends, Lin Xiao Xiao is waiting to intercept him immediately, her makeup flawless, but her eyes betraying a hint of panic. She demands to know how he did. He simply says it was all right, which causes Xiao Xiao to frown, pressing him to define what all right actually means. She wants to know how many multiple-choice questions he missed. Looking at her, he finds it almost funny. She is clearly trying to gauge his score to estimate her own. He tells her he doesn't know because he hasn't checked the answers yet. Xiao Xiao curls her lip in dissatisfaction at his vague response. She turns and leaves without another word. He watches her retreating back, thinking to himself that there is no need for her to rush. She will have plenty to worry about soon enough. The results will be out tomorrow, after all. However, during the afternoon math exam, an unexpected problem arises when his stomach suddenly begins to ache violently. Perhaps it was something he ate, or perhaps it was the sheer weight of the pressure, but cold sweat begins to pour down his face as he slumps over the desk. It takes several seconds for the pain to subside enough for him to breathe. The proctor walks over, whispering to ask if he is all right or if he needs the infirmary. He shakes his head, gritting his teeth as he insists he is fine. To be honest, the very idea of leaving now was laughable. He had waited 18 years for this one exam. Even if he were to collapse, he was determined to do so right here over this test paper. He pinches his thigh hard, using the sharp sting of pain to distract himself from his abdominal distress so he can continue. It was a desperate move, but effective. The numbers and formulas blur before his eyes for a moment, but he pushes through on pure muscle memory until every single question is answered. For the final, most difficult problem, he uses 3 different methods to verify his answer. Only after confirming it is correct does he finally set down his pen. He leaves the hall in a state of near total exhaustion, finding a quiet corner to crouch down and recover. Xiao Xiao sends a message asking about his math performance. He replies with just 2 words, "It's normal." She immediately sends back a smug emoji, clearly convinced she has the upper hand again. It was a display of pure, blissful ignorance. On the second day, during the science and English exams, his condition improves significantly. These 2 subjects, as it happens, are his strongest suits. The science section, especially the physics and complex biology genetics, consisted of problems he had practiced countless times. He worked through them with ease. Everything flowed perfectly, and with 20 minutes remaining, he checked every single answer twice to ensure not a single mistake had been made. English was even easier. It would be difficult for any grader not to give him a high score. After the final bell, we see him walking out of the building. Standing at the entrance, he looked up at the sun. Though it was blinding, he didn't look away, letting the warmth wash over his face after 18 long years. He had finally made it. Lin Xiao Xiao was the first to intercept him, dressed vibrantly like a proud peacock, her eyes shimmering with a certain greedy anticipation. She demanded to know how it went. He told her it was good, better than ever before, in fact, and that he had never felt this confident in his entire life. Xiao Xiao's eyes lit up as if she were staring at a mountain of gold. She immediately ran to their parents to claim credit for this perceived success. She told them that since her brother did so well, she must have done even better. Watching her joyful retreat, he couldn't help but smile himself. It was the smile of a hunter watching his prey walk into a trap. To be honest, she looked exactly like a moth fluttering toward a flame. She mistook the fire for the sun. Once summer break began, Xiao Xiao completely let herself go, boldly promising her parents a top 10 provincial ranking. She demanded a massive advance on her allowance, upgrading her phone and computer to the most expensive models available without a second thought. She took the money her parents had worked so hard to save and squandered it on a trip with her friends, posting daily updates of her extravagance. Her social media was a nonstop parade of partying. She had no idea of the disaster looming ahead. One night, he saw her latest post. It was a photo of a lavish dinner with a caption claiming she was celebrating her future top scorer status, followed by a flood of admiring comments. Reading those comments felt utterly absurd. Meanwhile, when he asked his parents for a small travel fee to visit his grandfather in the countryside, his mother shut him down before he could even finish. She didn't even look up, her tone dismissive as she asked what there was to see. She claimed the family had no money, ignoring the fact that Xiao Xiao was spending it all. Her blatant double standard was enough to make him sick. They were stingy with him, but threw money at Xiao Xiao like water. His father, watching TV without turning around, added another cold remark. He told him that if he wanted to go, he should find his own way and stop relying on the family. He said nothing more and simply returned to his room. The next morning, he headed to a construction site to find work moving bricks. The sun was punishingly hot, making his head spin, but he didn't stop. He gritted his teeth and worked for half a month just to save enough for travel and gifts for his grandfather. To be honest, those were some of the hardest days of his life. By the end of those 2 weeks, he had saved over 1,000 yuan, enough for the round-trip fare and some supplements for the old man. Then came the day the scores were released. It happened to be Lin Xiaoxiao's 18th birthday. To ensure she was crowned at the absolute peak of her life in front of everyone, she threw an incredibly lavish banquet. Every relative, colleague, and boss their parents knew had been invited. Inside the banquet hall, we hear a constant, rising tide of flattery and empty compliments. A distant relative, glass in hand, approached his father with a face full of smiles, remarking that the Lin family ancestors must be watching over them for such luck. He claimed it was rare for twins to both be so outstanding, but another relative chimed in with a much sharper tone, noting that the eldest son was just a bookworm. They whispered that he was socially inept, unlike the sweet and clever Xiao Xiao, whose grades and personality were supposedly 100 times better than her brother's. The younger generation crowded around Xiao Xiao like stars orbiting the moon. One cousin, her eyes red with envy, told Xiao Xiao she was truly incredible. She told her that with a top university admission in one hand and a handsome boyfriend in the other, she was the ultimate winner in life. The crowd urged her to check her score, wanting to witness the historical moment a top scholar was born. Xiao Xiao told them not to worry, acting as if she were already royalty. She boasted that if she were the provincial top scorer, the elite universities would call her first to scout her. Just as she finished speaking, a phone actually rang. But the call wasn't for her, it was for him. Under the stunned gaze of the entire room, he began answering one call after another from the country's top recruitment offices. Admissions officers from every prestigious university were on the line. He politely thanked them, stating he would consider his options carefully, while Xiao Xiao watched in disbelief. Her eyes looked ready to burst as she stared at her own silent phone. Gritting her teeth to save face, she forced out a remark that the best is always saved for last. Finally, the official score portal opened. Everyone swarmed forward, pressuring Xiao Xiao to log in and reveal her triumph to the room. Meanwhile, we see him in the corner, quietly opening the query page on his own phone. Despite his absolute confidence, his palms were slightly damp with sweat. His mother turned to him first, her voice casual as she asked what he got. He simply turned the screen toward the crowd and spoke with a calm, steady voice. He told them he had scored 741 points. The room fell into a shocked silence. Deep down, he was suppressing a tidal wave of wild, ecstatic joy. He remained expressionless, thinking only of his success. His mother froze for a moment, gave a stingy, dismissive nod, and immediately turned her back on him to rush to Xiao Xiao. Her voice trembled with excitement as she told Xiao Xiao that her score must be even higher. Soon, Xiao Xiao was completely surrounded by the expectant crowd. There was nowhere for her to hide, even if she wanted to. With trembling fingers, she clicked confirm, and a second later, her face froze in a truly spectacular expression. She looked as if she had swallowed a fly. On the screen, 3 bright red numbers appeared, 751. Lin Xiaoxiao's voice began to shake as a deathly silence fell over the room. In the quiet, a distant relative who hadn't realized the truth yet continued to offer blind praise, exclaiming that 751 was an incredible achievement. They noted it was 10 points higher than her brother's score, calling Xiao Xiao a prodigy, forgetting, of course, that the maximum possible score on the exam is only 750. The atmosphere froze instantly. Xiao Xiao panicked, her cold sweat streaking through her exquisite makeup until her face was a mess of ruined foundation. She told herself it had to be a system glitch caused by too many people checking at once. Like a madwoman, she refreshed the page, her fingers nearly stabbing through the screen. Once, twice, 3 times, that cursed 751 remained nailed to the total score column like a spike. To be honest, it was a mathematical impossibility. Someone suggested trying another phone to see if it was a cache issue. Xiao Xiao grabbed a guest's phone like a drowning person clutching at a straw. The result was still 751. That extra point felt like a massive, invisible hand delivering a stinging slap across her face in front of everyone. Just then, the banquet hall doors were pushed open. Several uniformed police officers and officials from the Education Bureau walked in with grim expressions. The lead official looked around the room and asked in a deep, stern voice for Lin Xiaoxiao. We see the festive mood vanish in an instant. He explained that the testing institute had detected an extreme anomaly, suggesting a malicious system hack or major fraud, and ordered her to come for investigation. Xiao Xiao's legs gave out from sheer terror, and she collapsed onto the floor, her face turning as pale as a ghost, which, given the circumstances, was quite understandable. Her parents panicked at the sight of the authorities. However, their first instinct wasn't to comfort their daughter, but to instinctively search for a scapegoat. In the chaos, his mother actually grabbed him and shoved him forward, pointing at him and screaming at the top of her lungs that he was the one who did it. She frantically claimed that he must have hacked the system to frame his sister by changing the score, begging the officers to take him away instead. She insisted this had nothing to do with her daughter. And here we see the true nature of his parents, ready to sacrifice him without a moment's hesitation. It didn't matter how absurd the reason was, or how nonsensical the logic seemed. As long as they could save their precious daughter, they didn't care what happened to him. Deep down, his heart finally went cold, yet he felt a strange sense of relief. He shook off his mother's hand and looked coldly at the group of clowns before him. He told them he wasn't a hacker, but the actual top scorer in the province, Lin Feng. Meanwhile, Xiao Xiao just sat there, completely broken. As the girl who achieved the human miracle of 751 points trembled, her father rushed forward in a fit of rage, intending to slap Lin Feng. Lin Feng grabbed his wrist with a grip of iron, his fierce gaze making the man flinch. He warned him not to even try it. He reminded them that the authorities were standing right behind him, and that top universities and the media were already fighting over him. From this moment on, we see a shift in power. No one in this house would ever restrain or bully him again. The coming-of-age ceremony, originally meant for boasting, had turned into a complete farce as Xiao Xiao was led away for investigation. The mess left behind was impossible to cover up. A 751-point score on the national exam was enough to set the internet on fire. By that night, the story had exploded on social media. Everyone was watching the drama unfold, mocking the sheer greed involved. Some joked that if you're going to cheat, you should at least use your brain. Scoring 751 out of 750 is an insult to the system. Netizens dug up Xiao Xiao's social media, discovering she had spent the last 6 months partying rather than studying. To be honest, it wasn't a surprise. Public opinion turned sharply against her, with everyone assuming she had used connections to change her score, only to mess up the math. As Lin Feng scrolled through the comments, he felt a sense of satisfaction that was difficult to put into words. It turned out Xiao Xiao's answer sheet had a strange anomaly where the scanner registered an extra point on the multiple choice section. Though there was no direct evidence of tampering yet, the Education Bureau decided she must retake the exam using a backup paper for fairness. When the news reached home, Xiao Xiao was lying on the sofa. Upon hearing she had to retake the test, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Her face turned deathly pale as she screamed, demanding to know why she had to retake it when it was clearly a system error. She insisted her score was real. Her father sat nearby, his face grim and ashen, as he tried to maintain some semblance of control. He spoke in a low, stern voice, attempting to quiet the chaos that had consumed their living room. He tried to discuss a strategy, telling Xiao Xiao not to panic and that a girl as smart as her would have no problem with a retake. But Xiao Xiao had lost her mind, throwing a tantrum and wailing that she wouldn't take the test unless Lin Feng took it with her. She hysterically demanded that her brother sit right next to her during the exam, which, naturally, revealed exactly what she was planning. She rushed over and grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin as her eyes turned a terrifying shade of red. She demanded that Lin Feng accompany her to the exam. She screamed, asking if he heard her. Lin Feng simply shook her hand off, his voice turning ice cold as he reminded her that he had already finished his own exams. He asked why on earth he should retake it with her. Lin Xiaoxiao froze, looking at him with utter disbelief, as if the idea of him refusing her had never even crossed her mind. Her mother immediately rushed in to take sides, snapping at Lin Feng for his attitude when his sister was clearly suffering so much. She pleaded with him to help, claiming the family's reputation was at stake, and asking what the harm was in sitting through the exam one more time. As we watch this, we see Lin Feng looking at them with a mix of mockery and pity. He wondered what family reputation they were even talking about. That reputation belonged to Lin Xiaoxiao alone, and it had nothing to do with him. He gave a firm refusal, turned back to his room, and locked the door. He ignored the shouting and pounding on the door. Naturally, the Education Bureau rejected such an absurd request for a partner anyway. And so, Lin Xiaoxiao found herself completely alone for the retake. The exam was held in a bureau conference room, under the constant gaze of 24-hour surveillance cameras. 3 proctors watched her every move, determined to prevent any further tricks. The result, as we might have expected, was an absolute disaster. She finished with a total score of 157, a result even lower than what she usually got by just guessing. To be honest, it was a pathetic showing. She only had a 300-point foundation to begin with, and she had spent the last 6 months chasing romance and dreams of glory instead of opening a book. On the day the results came out, Lin Feng was working at a construction site. When a classmate messaged him about the 157, he paused in shock. Then he began to laugh, crouching on the ground for a long time. A coworker thought he had heat stroke and offered water, but he just waved him off. He told them he was simply too happy. This retake had completely stripped away her disguise. First a 751, and now a 157. The massive contrast caused the internet to explode. The comments from netizens were becoming more colorful by the second, with many laughing at the 157 score. People pointed out that this was her true level, and that the previous score was undeniable proof of cheating. Someone even created a meme about it. They placed the 751 and 157 side by side with a caption, "From heaven to hell," in just one retake. Lin Xiaoxiao couldn't handle the online backlash. She tried to post her old transcripts to prove her ability, but the internet sleuths tore her history apart. They noticed her suspicious progress in the final year. Before that, she had been a consistent 300-point student. Everyone was now certain that this girl's deception had started long before the final exam. While the cheating scandal raged on, netizens dug up Lin Feng's transcripts as well, uncovering every major exam score from primary school all the way through high school. Every record showed him consistently ranking in the top 3. "This is a true scholar, steady as a rock," one commenter noted, and we can't help but agree. Others wondered if they were truly siblings, given the massive gap. One person even joked that while one was a 750, the other wasn't even worth a 250. Watching those comments, Lin Feng felt a complex mix of emotions. He once believed that good grades would earn his parents' approval, but later, he realized the truth. No matter how high he scored, in their eyes, he could never compare to Lin Xiaoxiao. They didn't want an excellent son, they wanted a safety net for their daughter. The teachers and classmates who once adored Lin Xiaoxiao now avoided her like the plague. Even the parents couldn't step outside without being pointed at. Neighbors gossiped behind their backs, calling the Lin daughter a fraud who had cheated for years. It was, to be honest, a complete humiliation for the family. During that time, Lin Xiaoxiao hid in her room like a cornered rat, too afraid to face anyone. It was a stark contrast to her former arrogance. She kept her curtains tightly drawn and made her mother leave meals at the door. Meanwhile, Lin Feng received his admission letter from the prestigious Qingbei Medical School. He packed his bags and returned to his hometown to stay with his grandfather. He believed that once school started in late August, he would finally be free. The countryside summer was as hot as a steamer, yet he felt a rare sense of peace. His grandfather's old house sat quietly at the foot of a mountain. It was a simple 3-room earthen house with an old locust tree in front, where the cicadas buzzed incessantly in the heat. His parents had wanted Lin Xiaoxiao to have all the love and resources, viewing him as mere competition, but his grandfather never spoke ill of them. The old man simply cared for him in silence, teaching him to read and write while reminding him to rely only on himself. It was a quiet, steady kind of love. His grandfather often said that education was the only way out for a poor child. Lin Feng took those words to heart, carving them into his very soul. He spent 20 days at the old house, waking early to help feed the chickens, reading in the courtyard, and walking through the fields in the afternoon. In the evenings, they sat under the locust tree. His grandfather told stories of how mischievous his father had been and how kind his mother was when she first arrived. Lin Feng listened to these unfamiliar tales as if they were about someone else's family. In his own memory, his parents had never been those people. One night, as they sat in the bright moonlight, his grandfather suddenly asked how he had done on the college entrance exam. Lin Feng took a moment to reflect. He answered honestly, saying he thought he had done quite well. His grandfather nodded, a faint light shining in his cloudy eyes as he looked at the moon in silence. After a while, the old man whispered that as long as he did well, that was all that mattered. He sighed, his voice sounding a bit raspy as he spoke of his own life. He admitted he hadn't achieved much in his time, so he placed all his hopes on the boy. Deep down, Lin Feng felt a lump in his throat. In all his years, only one person, his grandfather, had ever spoken to him like that. Only he truly wished for his success. Lin Feng promised that once he graduated and found work, he would bring the old man to live in the city. His grandfather just waved it off, smiling like a child, saying he couldn't get used to city life, but the thought was enough. That night, as he lay on the earthen bed of the old house listening to the insects outside, he told himself that once the results were out, everything would finally be settled. He wanted to show everyone that Lin Feng was not a useless waste to be bullied, nor was he meant to be anyone's stepping stone. Yes, he was done playing that role. By August 12th, with about half a month left before school started, we find him in the courtyard helping his grandfather dry corn under the sun. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was his mother. He froze for a moment, as she almost never initiated contact. The last time she called was before the exams, just to ask, with a tone full of scrutiny and calculation, what score he expected. He answered, only to hear the sound of sobbing on the other end. Her voice was hoarse, strained and urgent, as she begged him to come back immediately. She claimed his mother, his own mother, was suddenly and critically ill. His heart sank instantly, and the corn in his hands nearly spilled onto the ground. He frantically asked what was wrong and which hospital she was in. But his mother only cried, refusing to answer his questions, repeating, come back quickly, until the line went dead. He stood there, his mind a complete mess. When his grandfather came out and saw the look on his face, he asked what had happened. Lin Feng explained the situation, and the old man's expression shifted instantly. He urged the boy to pack his things and go back, noting that no matter what, they were still his parents. Lin Feng nodded and rushed inside to stuff a few clothes into his backpack. As he headed for the door, his grandfather hurried after him and pressed a heavy cloth bundle into his hands. He told him to take it, explaining it was the money he had saved up. To be honest, it was likely all he had. Inside was a stack of crumpled small bills and a few hundred yuan notes, totaling about 2,000 yuan. It was his life savings, earned bit by bit. From selling eggs and vegetables, Lin Feng tried to push it back, but the old man had already turned away, his hunched back looking small and frail in the doorway. Clutching that bundle, Lin Feng felt his eyes burn. The journey ahead was long, a 2-hour bus to the county, then a 3-hour train to the city, followed by a high-speed rail transfer. The entire trip would take nearly 10 hours. He quickly bought the earliest ticket available. As we see him boarding the first bus, the scenery blurs past the window, but Lin Feng's mind begins to cool and sharpen. Something felt wrong. There were far too many inconsistencies. To be honest, his mother's sobbing had sounded a bit too exaggerated. Usually, one would say your father is at such and such hospital, come quickly, not come back home. If he was being rescued in a hospital, how would she have the time to stay at home and call him? And her tone carried an indefinable urgency, a strange kind of desperation. It didn't sound like she was worried about her husband. It sounded like she was afraid Lin Feng wouldn't return. He decided to call his father's phone. The line was busy. He tried again, but it was still busy. Changing his approach, he called a colleague of his father's, a man he'd met a few times. He politely asked if anything had happened to his father. The man sounded utterly surprised, noting that his father had treated everyone to dinner just last week and was doing perfectly fine. Lin Feng played it off, saying he must have misheard something. He hung up and leaned back against the seat, staring at the rolling mountains outside. Strangely enough, the weight in his heart finally lifted. It wasn't that he was cold-blooded. He simply knew this family too well. If his father were truly in critical condition, Lin Xiaoxiao would have been crying for sympathy all over the internet by now. Since it was a scam, he had to wonder, what was their goal in luring him back? After a few hours of quiet contemplation, the answer became painfully obvious. It all came back to Lin Xiaoxiao's recent scandal. The mess was too big, and that 751 score joke was still trending. Even if his brother repeated a year, he'd never get into a good university. Without Lin Feng to carry him, his brother was nothing. Meanwhile, Lin Feng was about to start a new life at a top-tier university, escaping the swamp. They simply wouldn't allow that to happen. In their eyes, his only value was to serve as Xiaoxiao's stepping stone, his tool, and his blood bank. Once he realized this, he didn't panic. He felt the calm of a hunter who has spotted the trap and is now waiting for the prey to slip up. This time, however, the roles of hunter and prey were about to be reversed. If they wanted to put on a play, he would help them finish it. But the final script? That would be written by him. He even sent a few messages to his future roommates in the university group chat, briefly explaining his situation just in case. He told them that if they couldn't reach him for over 48 hours, they should call the police, and he shared his real-time location with them. It was better to be safe than sorry. His roommates were shocked by the complexity of his family situation, but they promised to help if anything went wrong. They told him to stay safe and keep in touch. Seeing those messages, Lin Feng felt a wave of warmth. People he had never even met were willing to help him, while his so-called flesh and blood were trying to push him into a pit. It was a bitter irony. When he finally arrived home, he stood downstairs with his suitcase, looking up at the place where he had lived for 12 years without ever feeling like he belonged. Taking a deep breath, he went upstairs and knocked. The door opened to reveal his mother, her eyes red as if she had just been crying. She froze for a moment upon seeing him, then immediately forced a fawning smile, exclaiming that he was finally back. She urged him to come inside with an unusual enthusiasm that, frankly, gave him goosebumps. Since when had she ever been this attentive to him? He entered the house calmly, his eyes quickly scanning the living room. There sat his father on the sofa, watching television with the remote in hand. His complexion was healthy and ruddy. There wasn't a single sign of a medical emergency. Standing in the entryway, with his hand still on his suitcase handle, he asked in a level voice why his father was watching TV if he was supposed to be ill. The air in the living room seemed to freeze for a second. His father glanced up with an awkward expression, and his mother's smile stiffened. She quickly tried to cover it up, claiming it had been a false alarm and that his father had only felt unwell the day before. She explained that after a hospital checkup, it turned out to be nothing serious, but since he was leaving for Bain soon, they simply wanted the whole family to be together. Hearing the words family come from her mouth felt particularly insulting. He didn't expose the lie, merely nodding as he changed into his slippers. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of Lin Xiaoxiao on the sofa. His brother was huddled in the corner in pajamas, his hair a mess and his face sallow, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a completely different person from the arrogant golden child of a few months ago. As Lin Feng entered, the boy looked up. His gaze was a complex mix of resentment, fear, and something else Lin Feng couldn't quite decipher. He ignored it and went straight to his room. His room was at the very back, a small space of barely 10 square meters that never saw the sun. It had been a storage closet once. He had only moved in after returning from his grandfather's house for school, and even then, it was barely cleared out for him. Meanwhile, Lin Xiaoxiao's room was a large, sun-drenched master bedroom. In this house, the distribution of resources had always been precisely and cruelly divided. After closing the door, he began to inspect the room, the desk, the bookshelf, the wardrobe, and under the bed. He checked every corner to ensure nothing had been tampered with. Then, he pulled a spare internal phone from his backpack to set up a little insurance policy. He found a hidden angle, propping the phone up among the clutter on the bookshelf so the camera pointed directly at the door. He set it to record, switching it to silent mode to ensure there would be no notification sounds. With that done, he lay on the bed, pretending to nap while his ears remained sharp, catching every tiny movement from the living room. For dinner, his mother had prepared a full table of dishes and, for the first time ever, actually called him to join them. She even put food on his plate, telling him he looked thin and should eat more since he was leaving home soon. It was a touching scene, if one didn't know better. The food tasted like nothing to him. His mind was busy analyzing their endgame and wondering when they would finally show their teeth. After dinner, his father cleared his throat. It was the sound he always made before a lecture. He started by saying that the reason they had asked Lin Feng to come back was actually to discuss something important. And here we go. Lin Feng looked up, his face wearing a mask of perfectly measured confusion as he waited for the trap to spring. His father explained that his sister hadn't been doing well lately, claiming the college entrance exam incident had been a devastating blow to her mental state. He claimed she was now severely depressed and wouldn't even leave her room. He said he and the mother had discussed it, noting that Lin Feng was her twin brother. He asked if Lin Feng could spend more time with her and offer some guidance. Lin Feng waited for the real motive to drop, and sure enough, his mother chimed in. Her voice carried a tentative, probing tone as she reminded him that they were twins, bound by blood that is thicker than water. She insisted they were family who should stick together, asking why he wouldn't help his sister. Lin Feng remained silent, offering no reaction at all. He simply watched them as the atmosphere grew tense. Suddenly, Lin Xiaoxiao looked up, her eyes red and brimming with tears as she gazed at him. With a trembling voice, she told him she knew she was wrong. She claimed she had spent this time reflecting and finally understood her mistakes. She apologized for how she had treated him in the past and begged him to give her just one more chance to make things right. He nearly laughed out loud. Her acting had certainly improved, but he wasn't buying it. He asked them flatly what they actually wanted him to do. He tore right through the pleasantries, having no patience for their games. His parents exchanged a quick glance, as if confirming their next move. His father finally laid his cards on the table, explaining that they had devised a plan to ensure Xiaoxiao could also attend university. Lin Feng raised an eyebrow as his father continued, claiming Xiaoxiao had told them the truth about her college entrance exam results. He mentioned that 10-point rule, something Lin Feng surely understood better than they did, suggesting a special connection between the twins. As long as he was there, she could score high. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. She had actually revealed their secret. His father stood up, walking over with a tone that brooked no argument, stating that he and the mother had already discussed the matter thoroughly. He asked if Lin Feng could simply delay his start at Qingbei by a year to repeat his senior year alongside Xiaoxiao. That way, she could get into a top school too, and having 2 Qingbei students would bring immense honor to the family. Lin Feng froze, not because the request was absurd, but because of the sheer, unadulterated confidence with which they proposed it. It was as if this were the natural order of things, as if sacrificing his future for Lin Xiaoxiao's sake was perfectly reasonable. His mother, sensing an opening, leaned in and took his hand, her eyes gleaming with a very specific kind of calculation. She insisted this wouldn't hurt him at all, noting that he was so brilliant he would surely succeed again next year. She argued that with his reputation and another year of study, the top universities would be even more desperate to recruit him. And since Xiaoxiao would have a bright future too, she claimed it was a win-win situation for the entire family of 4. A win-win, indeed. Lin Feng pointed out that he already had his admission letter, so there was no logical reason to repeat a year. His father dismissed this with a wave of his hand, claiming the letter meant nothing and would simply expire if he didn't report. He told Lin Feng that as the brother, he should yield to his sister, promising that Xiaoxiao would never forget his sacrifice. He even suggested she would share her future earnings with him, which, to Lin Feng, sounded like the funniest joke in the world. When he flatly refused, the atmosphere in the room instantly plummeted to sub-zero temperatures. His father's face darkened immediately. His mother's expression froze, while Lin Xiaoxiao's eyes snapped from pleading to a sharp, cold resentment. His father stood tall, looking down at him with a voice now laced with an open threat, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. His father demanded to know why he had refused so flatly, but Lin Feng stood up and looked them in the eye, stating there was simply no room for negotiation. He asked them why he should give up his spot at Qingbei to repeat a year for someone who had only managed to score a meager 157 points. The idea of using his hard-earned score to smuggle her into a top university was absurd. His mother shrieked, asking how he could even question it. She argued that because she was his sister, helping her was his natural duty. Lin Feng countered that he had already helped her for 18 long years. He reminded them how they gave her every resource while abandoning him in the countryside, only remembering his existence now that she had ruined her own future. Now they expected him to sacrifice his entire career to clean up her mess. His father slammed the table so hard the dishes rattled, shouting Lin Feng's name in fury. When asked about his attitude, Lin Feng simply replied that this was it. He wasn't doing it. He turned his back on them and headed for his room. Lin Xiaoxiao let out a hysterical scream, claiming those points should have been hers and that without her, he was nothing at all. We see him stop in his tracks and turn back to look at her twisted, resentful face. He told her quite clearly to listen well. Every single point he earned was written by his own hand, stroke by stroke, and had absolutely nothing to do with her. The fact that she could somehow absorb his scores was a stroke of luck for her, he noted, not a talent she actually possessed. It certainly wasn't a bargaining chip she could use to blackmail him. Lin Xiaoxiao was left speechless, tears finally spilling over from her eyes. Whether from anger or desperation, it was hard to say. His mother rushed over to shield her, pointing a finger and accusing Lin Feng of being heartless. He simply asked if they had any hearts themselves. Tired of the circular arguments, he finally retreated into his room. He locked the door behind him, leaving the sounds of crashing objects and muffled chaos on the other side. His father's curses, his mother's sobbing, and Xiaoxiao's screams all blended together like a boiling pot of resentment. Leaning against the door, he closed his eyes, feeling a strange sense of calm amidst the storm. This, he knew, was only the first round. The real battle was still ahead, as he had a feeling they wouldn't give up so easily, but he had plenty of patience to spare. That night, sleep didn't come. He lay there staring at the ceiling, ears alert, until he heard a faint sound around 2 in the morning. It was a soft, rustling noise outside his door, like people whispering in the dark. He held his breath, listening intently to the shadows. It was the voices of his father and mother, kept very low, but Lin Feng could still hear them clearly as his mother suggested a plan. She whispered that they should take his things while he slept, for without his ID and admission letter, he wouldn't be able to leave. Seeing the lights were out, she urged them to act tonight to avoid any more trouble, and we hear their footsteps approaching his door. His heart raced, but he remained perfectly still, pretending to be fast asleep as the doorknob turned ever so slightly. He was glad he had locked it, as his mother cursed under her breath before deciding to wait until tomorrow since he couldn't escape anyway. As the footsteps faded, Lin Feng opened his eyes and stared into the darkness, a cold smile forming on his lips. It was exactly as he expected. They never intended to let him go, and he had been in their trap since the moment he arrived. What they didn't know, however, was that he was prepared, and it wasn't yet certain who would win this little game. The next morning, he tentatively tried the door only to find it locked from the outside, causing his heart to sink for a moment. He walked to the window and saw the security bars were bolted tight, making an exit impossible, though his phone signal remained. The Wi-Fi was cut, so he used his data to message his roommates, telling them he was safe for now, but that things were looking grim. Around 10 in the morning, the lock clicked and his mother entered with a bowl of porridge, wearing a forced, hollow smile. She asked if he was hungry and if he had finally come to his senses, but Lin Feng didn't reach for the bowl. Setting the porridge on the table, she sighed with a tone that carried a sharp edge of a threat, advising him to be smart. She pointed out that even if he got into Qingbei, it wouldn't matter if he had no way to pay for tuition or living expenses. She asked if he really thought they would give him a single cent, suggesting he wouldn't even be able to afford to start classes. She claimed he would eventually have to come crawling back, and seeing his silence, she assumed he was starting to waver. To raise the stakes, she mentioned that his admission letter might not even be safe anymore, urging him to just listen and repeat the year. She promised they would support him fully next year if he cooperated, but warned him of the consequences if he remained stubborn. She left the threat hanging in the air, her meaning perfectly clear, and it was only after she left that Lin Feng noticed something new. The door was locked once more, and from that moment on, Lin Feng was officially under house arrest. On the first day, he managed to stay calm. By the second day, however, anxiety began to set in, not out of fear, but because time was slipping away as the start of the semester drew closer. He knew he had to find a way out, and on the third day, he decided to take a risk. At 2 in the morning, while everyone slept, he rose quietly. Using the file from a pair of nail clippers, he began to pick the lock. These old-fashioned spring locks aren't particularly difficult to open, and after about 10 minutes, he finally heard a crisp click. The door opened. Holding his breath, he began to edge his way out, step by agonizing step. The living room was pitch black as he felt along the wall toward the front door, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might jump out of his throat. The floorboards beneath him groaned occasionally, and with every creak, he froze to listen, only continuing once he was certain no one had stirred. Just as his hand was about to touch the front door handle, the lights flickered on. He froze instantly. His father was standing right there in the hallway. The man held a wooden club, his face livid with rage. He had clearly been waiting for this moment. Lin Feng wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. What followed was a storm of blows and verbal abuse. He curled into a ball to protect his head as the club rained down on his body. Every single strike brought a piercing, agonizing pain that radiated through his entire being. To be honest, it was a brutal display of cruelty. His mother and Lin Xiaoxiao appeared from their rooms at some point, standing by to watch. Not a single person spoke up to stop the violence. In fact, we see a flicker of satisfaction on Xiaoxiao's face. Eventually, his father grew tired and stopped, gasping for breath as Lin Feng lay there. He remained sprawled on the floor, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't out of fear, though. It was pure, unadulterated fury. 18 years of repressed resentment were screaming to break free from his chest in that moment, but somehow, he managed to hold it back. He told himself it wasn't time yet. He didn't have enough evidence, and his final move wasn't quite ready to be played. He was dragged back to his room and thrown onto the bed. The door was locked again, this time with a heavy external padlock that couldn't be picked. As he lay on the bed, his back burning with pain, the agony actually served to sharpen his mind. It made everything much clearer. He reminded himself that he had waited 18 years. A few more days wouldn't matter. He would let them have their fun until he had enough evidence. Once he was ready, none of them would escape. For the next 2 days, he remained perfectly obedient and made no further attempts to flee. On the surface, it seemed as though Lin Feng had finally accepted his fate. His parents, believing he had been beaten into submission, began to relax their guard just a little. However, the door remained locked, and he was still a prisoner. He used these 2 days to carefully observe their daily routines, noting every detail of their lives. He memorized exactly when each person went to sleep and when they woke up, etching these patterns into his mind while waiting for the perfect moment to act. That moment arrived on the 4th night. At 2:07 a.m., he heard the lock on his door click softly. This wasn't a tentative sound. Someone was deliberately opening it. He kept his eyes shut, maintaining a steady breath to feign deep sleep, though every single nerve in his body was pulled taut with anticipation. There were 2 of them. He could tell simply by the rhythm of their breathing as they entered the room. It was his mother and father. They crept toward his desk and began rummaging through his things while he remained perfectly still, maintaining his sleeping posture. His heart began to race despite his efforts to stay calm. He knew exactly what they were looking for, his ID card and his university admission letter. Those documents were his keys to escaping this hell, and to them, they were the only leverage they had left to keep him trapped. The searching continued for several minutes until he heard his mother whisper, "Lao Lin, I can't find them. Where do you think he hid them?" His father grumbled back impatiently, telling her to keep looking. He was certain the items were in the room, as Lin Feng had no way of taking them out. They tore through the desk drawers, the bookshelf, and his backpack. They even went so far as to feel through the pockets of all his clothes. He felt someone approach the bed and linger there, likely debating whether to check his pillow. Suddenly, a third voice drifted in from the doorway. It was Lin Xiaoxiao. She asked if they had found it yet, ignoring her parents' hushed warnings not to wake him. She stepped into the room with heavy, careless footsteps. We see her stand by his bedside, her gaze sweeping over him with a cold, scrutinizing intensity that felt as venomous as a snake. He could almost feel her breath on his face. Then, her voice rang out, chillingly certain, "Stop pretending. I know you're awake." He didn't flinch, maintaining his rhythmic breathing even as he cursed her sharp intuition in his mind. To be honest, the woman was terrifyingly observant. Lin Xiaoxiao didn't waste time arguing about whether he was awake or not. Instead, she simply joined the search herself. Her movements were far more violent than those of her parents. She threw his belongings aside, tossing books from the shelves and ripping drawers completely out of the desk. He had hidden his ID card inside the lining of his pillowcase, and his admission letter was tucked away in a place they hadn't thought to look yet. As for the letter, he had folded it into a tiny square and sewn it into the suitcase lining. He truly believed they wouldn't find it, but he had underestimated Lin Xiaoxiao's sheer madness. She flipped his pillow over and began feeling the pillowcase inch by inch, using a technique that looked like a drug raid, leaving no corner unchecked. When her hand stopped at the hidden layer, she let out a sharp scream of delight. Lin Feng's heart tightened, yet he remained still. Next, she lunged at his suitcase like a frenzied beast, dumping everything out before tearing at the lining. The sound of the fabric ripping was ear-piercingly loud as her fingernails scraped against the interior until she finally felt that hard object. He couldn't take it anymore and bolted upright, reaching out to flick on the bedside lamp. The sudden glare forced everyone to squint, and we see the scene finally revealed in full. His father and mother stood by the desk holding his ID card, looking slightly guilty but mostly self-righteous. Lin Xiaoxiao stood by the suitcase, clutching the envelope containing his admission letter. The expression on her face looked as though she had just discovered a buried treasure. His father spoke up with bold confidence. "Lin Feng, let's not beat around the bush. Xiaoxiao told us everything. As long as you're there, she can get high scores. This is your fate as siblings, so just accept it." His mother leaned in, her eyes filled with calculation and thinly veiled threats. "Xiaofeng, listen to me. Repeating a year won't hurt you. You're so smart that you'll surely get in again next year. Then Xiaoxiao will have a school too, and we'll have 2 elite graduates in the family. Isn't that a win-win? Lin Feng refused flatly. He stood up to reclaim his ID, but his father shoved him back with a heavy hand. The man was stronger than he expected. Lin Feng stumbled back against the wall, the impact sending a jolt of pain through the wounds on his back. His father leaned in close, his voice a cold, grim threat. You think you have a choice? From this day forward, you aren't going anywhere. Without your ID or your letter, you can't go to Ban. You'll stay home and obediently repeat the year. Once you finish the exams next year, everything goes back to normal and you can go to your top university. No one is ruining anything for you. Nothing. Forcing him to lose a year and throwing his entire life plan into chaos was, apparently, nothing. Becoming a stepping stone for a failure was, in their eyes, not a delay at all. Lin Feng took a deep breath, forcing down the surging rage. It wasn't time yet. He couldn't tear off the mask just yet. He needed more evidence. He asked if they had come to confiscate his things, and his mother let out a cold, sharp laugh. She no longer bothered to hide her disdain. Confiscate? She scoffed. Everything in this house belongs to your parents. Besides, you are still just a child. What's wrong with us keeping such an important ID card safe for you? Lin Feng turned his gaze toward Lin Xiaoxiao. She was pulling the admission letter out of the envelope, her face twisted with the smug satisfaction of revenge. She held that paper up like a trophy won in battle, and then she did something that he would never be able to forget. Clutching the letter, her eyes burning with a frantic, burning hatred, she slowly and deliberately tore it in half right in front of him. The sound was crisp, sharp, and piercing, like the sound of something vital snapping. But she wasn't satisfied. She kept tearing the halves until they became a pile of fragments, like snowflakes drifting down to the floor. Her movements were slow, as if she were savoring every second. With every tear, the corners of her mouth curled up just a bit more. Watching those fragments fall, Lin Feng's mind went blank for a moment. That paper represented 12 years of grueling study. It was the result of countless nights of hard work, the starting point of his new life, and she had shredded it. Lin Xiaoxiao watched his expression and laughed like a madwoman. The letter is gone. Let's see how you report for school now, Lin Feng. You're destined to be my stepping stone for the rest of your life. I want you to rot in the mud right alongside me. She grew more agitated as she spoke, her entire body trembling. With her hair disheveled, she looked like a ghost. Why should you be better than me? Why does everyone praise you? Why do you get to go to a top university while I can only stay home and be mocked? Those grades should have been mine. Tears began to stream down her face, but they weren't born of sadness. They were fueled by resentment and jealousy. But then, suddenly her voice dropped to a low whisper, as if she were talking to herself or perhaps sharing a dark secret. Do you have any idea how terrified I've been? Since we were kids, I've known my grades were a lie. They were stolen from you. With a hideous expression, she confessed that before every single exam, she was scared to death, scared that one day he would find out. She feared the day she would fail an exam and everyone would realize she was a failure. Through tears, she confessed her hatred for him, hating that he was smarter. Ridiculously, she believed he achieved high scores without any effort at all. I hate myself even more, she cried, her voice trembling with resentment. She claimed that without him, she was nothing, so he wasn't allowed to leave. To her, there was nothing left to discuss. He simply had to stay. He had to remain her stepping stone forever so that she could survive. It was a desperate, twisted logic, to be sure. Lin Feng looked at her, this person he had called sister for 18 years, and for the first time, he found her truly pathetic. But pity was no reason for forgiveness. Her pathetic nature was certainly no excuse for destroying his life. Meanwhile, his father and mother stood by, watching Lin Xiaoxiao's frantic display. Not one of them moved to stop her. In fact, their faces held a hint of approval, as if she had done something heroic. We see Lin Feng watching this. The scene felt utterly absurd and tragic to him. This was his family. This was the so-called bond of blood. He lowered his head in silence. As he stared at the fragments on the floor, his shoulders began to shake. They assumed he was crying, that he had finally broken. His mother let out a sneer. Her voice was dripping with condescension as she told him to stop his crying. To her, this wasn't such a big deal. She told him he could just take the exam again next year. This time, he should consider it a lesson learned and simply be more obedient in the future. Lin Feng said nothing, merely kneeling down to pick up the paper fragments with trembling hands. Lin Xiaoxiao watched his miserable state with glee. The smile on her face grew even more unrestrained as she taunted him to keep crying, telling him this was his fate. Then he looked up. She froze when she saw his face. There were no tears in his eyes, only a cold, piercing hatred and a fleeting, ghostly smile. That smile terrified her, causing her to instinctively step back and ask what he was laughing at. He stood up slowly, his voice hoarse but calm. He told her it was nothing, remarking that her performance had been quite brilliant. If things didn't work out for her later, he suggested she could always become an actress. He didn't say another word. Instead, he feigned despair, collapsing onto the edge of the bed with hollow eyes, muttering to himself. He whispered that it was over, all of it. Seeing him like this, Lin Xiaoxiao's wariness faded, replaced by the smug pride of a victor. She mocked him, asking why he hadn't been this afraid earlier. His father gave a cold snort of derision. He shoved Lin Feng's ID card into his own pocket and told everyone to go back to sleep. From this day on, this boy would be kept on a short leash. The boy wasn't going anywhere. The three of them walked out of his room as if they had just completed a major mission. Before leaving, his mother locked the door from the outside. The sound of the lock clicking was faint, yet it hit Lin Feng's heart like a thunderclap. He was a prisoner now. As the room fell back into darkness, he sat on the bed listening to their receding footsteps until the house was silent. After a while, he stood up and walked to the bookshelf. From a pile of clutter, he pulled out the backup phone that had been recording everything. They never suspected a thing. They had searched the whole room, but ignored the pile of junk they assumed was just trash. To be honest, it was a fatal oversight. The video had captured it all: Lin Xiaoxiao's madness as she tore the notice, and his parents standing by with cold, indifferent eyes. The footage showed their faces as they encouraged the destruction, along with their verbal confession of the conspiracy. It was all there, recorded in high definition. Lin Feng uploaded the video to the cloud, creating backup after backup to ensure it was safe. Then, he edited a shorter version for the public. He posted it online with a simple caption: "This is the family I'm trying to escape." Immediately after, he dialed the emergency services to report his situation. He told the operator he was being illegally detained by his family. He answered every question about his address and the situation with calm precision. The operator promised to send someone and told him to wait. He silenced the phone, hid it back in the junk pile, and lay back down on the bed. His heart was racing, but he knew he had to remain perfectly still. He had no idea how long the police would take or what might happen next. Deep down, he knew that if he could just survive this night, everything would change. Outside the window, the minutes ticked by into the early morning. As the sky began to pale, he kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling, his ears straining to catch every tiny sound within the house. At 4:23 a.m., we hear footsteps. It was Lin Xiaoxiao. She was walking softly, clearly trying not to wake the others in the house. In the silence of the night, her movements were still perfectly audible. She stopped right outside his door, and Lin Feng held his breath, frozen in place. The lock turned, and she entered the room again. He closed his eyes and feigned sleep, though his heart was thumping like a drum in his chest. She stood by his bed for a long moment. He could feel her gaze lingering on him, filled with scrutiny and lingering suspicion. Then, she began to wander around the room. The sound of her footsteps moved away from the bed as she started looking for something. The sound of rustling followed as she began digging through the pile of junk. Lin Feng's fingers tightened under the covers as his mind raced. He was calculating what to do if she found the phone when suddenly, the rustling stopped. The air froze, and he could almost hear his own heartbeat. He knew she had found it. It was over. He snapped his eyes open and sat up abruptly. There she was, holding the backup phone with the red recording light still glowing. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then to pure rage. "Lin Feng, you were recording us?" she screamed. She lunged at him like a wild beast. He didn't have time to dodge, and her nails tore across his face, leaving a burning trail of pain. He grabbed her wrists as they began to struggle. She might have been a girl, but in this moment, she possessed a terrifying, frantic strength. They crashed into the nightstand, sending the lamp shattering across the floor. The commotion was far too loud, and his parents were soon jolted awake. His father rushed in and, without a word, shoved him aside. The back of his head hit the wall hard. "You dare hit your sister?" his father roared. Lin Feng gasped for air, clutching his head. He told them he hadn't hit her, that she had attacked first. Meanwhile, Lin Xiaoxiao scrambled up from the floor, still clutching that phone tightly. She retreated behind her father as if finding her protector. "He recorded us," she hissed. "He recorded everything we did." At those words, his father's face changed instantly. He snatched the phone away and stared at the screen. His expression darkened as the veins on his forehead began to bulge with fury. "Lin Feng, very clever. You really are something, aren't you?" Then, he raised the phone and slammed it onto the floor. The screen shattered, and he stomped on it repeatedly until the device was nothing but a pile of scrap metal. Lin Feng watched the destruction, but deep down, he wasn't panicked at all. The video was already in the cloud. This phone was just a shell. However, he didn't let that show. Instead, he put on a look of utter despair, as if his last lifeline had just been snapped away. His mother arrived then, her face turning pale as she realized what was happening. "This ungrateful wolf wants to call the police. He wants to put us all in jail," she cried. He definitely wanted to post that video online, just like he exposed me before. Without another word, his father struck him once again. The blow was heavy, and Lin Feng's face swelled instantly as the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. His father warned him that this wasn't over. He was told to stay put and not even think about leaving. If he dared to call the police or post anything online, his father threatened to break his legs. The man stormed out, cursing, and strictly ordered the mother to keep a close watch on him. His mother lingered at the door, sighing that he had disappointed her. She claimed everything they did was for the sake of the family. A classic bit of manipulation, really. She told him to reflect on his actions and left, locking the door from the outside once again. This time, he heard the heavy sound of furniture being dragged to barricade the exit. Alone in the wreckage of his room, Lin Feng leaned against the wall and touched his swollen face. They had no idea that the police were already on their way. Nor did they realize the video was already circulating online. They thought destroying a single phone solved everything, but they were quite mistaken. The real storm was only just beginning. Time ticked by, the sky grew pale, and around 6 in the morning, the birds began to chirp. Suddenly, his father's phone rang, followed by a voice filled with sudden panic, asking about a video and who had posted it. Then came his mother's sharp screams and Lin Xiaoxiao's frantic crying. The entire house descended into chaos. The video had clearly gone viral. We wait in the silence of his room for what feels like half an hour until a heavy pounding echoes from the front door. "Open up, this is the police," a voice commanded. His father's response in the living room was frantic, laced with a guilty tremor. His mother panicked, asking what they should do, while his father desperately suggested hiding the boy and claiming he wasn't home. Lin Feng listened from inside, wondering where they could possibly hide him as the knocking grew even more urgent and demanding. The officers warned they would use force if the door wasn't opened. Finally, his father's resolve crumbled and the locks turned. A muffled wave of conversation followed. He couldn't hear the specifics, but he could sense his father trying to lie his way out of it. A few minutes later, the obstacles blocking his bedroom door were finally shoved aside, and the light from the hallway spilled in. Two uniformed officers stood there. The moment they saw him, their brows furrowed in immediate concern. One of them, a younger officer, stepped forward and asked if he was Lin Feng, the one who called. He nodded as they stared at his bruised and swollen face. The officer looked at his swollen lip and then surveyed the wreckage of the room, his expression hardening. "You're injured," he noted. "Who did this?" "My father," he replied. From the living room, his father's voice drifted in, a mix of lingering anger and obvious guilt, claiming it was just a family matter. He argued that he was simply disciplining his own son. The older officer turned to look at him, unimpressed. "A family matter? Illegal detention? And restricting someone's personal freedom is not a family matter. We received a report that someone was being held against their will, and we were sent a video. Why don't you see for yourself if this is a family matter?" On the screen, the footage began to play. It was the very video Lin Feng had recorded, his parents and Lin Xiaoxiao ransacking his things, and the moment Xiaoxiao frantically tore up his admission notice. Every word they had uttered was captured with perfect clarity. We see his father's face turn a sudden, sickly shade of pale. His mother's legs seemed to turn to jelly as she nearly collapsed, while Lin Xiaoxiao huddled in a corner, her hair a mess and her eyes hollow. She looked, quite frankly, like a crushed insect. "Lin Feng, can you walk?" the officer asked. "We need you to come with us to make a statement." He nodded and stood up, stepping over the debris on the floor. As he passed his father, the man suddenly reached out to stop him. The police immediately pushed his hand away, warning him that he was now a suspect in a case of illegal detention and intentional injury. His father's hand froze in midair, his face twisted as if he had swallowed a fly, furious, terrified, and utterly helpless all at once. Lin Feng didn't give him a second glance as he walked out the door. Behind him, his mother's wailing echoed, crying out that he couldn't do this to them. She wailed that they were his parents and asked how they could ever show their faces again. At that, he paused in his tracks. "You stopped treating me like a person a long time ago," he said. "Now it's your turn to see how that feels." His mother stood frozen in shock. It was as if she were seeing him for the first time. Suddenly, Lin Xiaoxiao rushed forward, screaming that he would regret this. She vowed she wouldn't let him get away with it. He looked at her distorted, hateful face and spoke quite calmly. "Lin Xiaoxiao, remember this. From today on, we are strangers." And with that, he turned and stepped into the police car. He didn't look back. By the time they finished the statements at the station, it was already noon. The evidence was quite damning. Based on the video and his injuries, his father was facing charges for assault and illegal detention. As for Lin Xiaoxiao's destruction of his property, the admission notice, though issued by the school, was his personal property, and Xiaoxiao would have to face the legal consequences for destroying it. He asked about his notice. Could it be replaced? The police explained he'd need to contact the university, though they promised to help him. They would provide the necessary documentation. He thanked them, and as he stepped out of the station, the sunlight was almost blinding. Squinting at the sky, Lin Feng felt as if he had finally woken from a long, grueling nightmare. Just then, his phone began to ring. It was an unknown number. When he answered, a familiar voice came through the line, sounding breathless. "Xiaofeng, is that you? Are you okay? We saw the video." The voice was urgent, and in the background, we can hear the muffled chatter of other people. It seemed his roommates were all there. He assured them he was fine and had called the police, which prompted a round of cheers on the other end. Then Chen Xian's voice rang out, shouting that they had been worried sick and asking if he needed a ride. Lin Feng couldn't help but smile. He told them it wasn't necessary and hung up. Standing there, he took a moment to consider his next move. It was a complicated situation. His father had taken his ID, and Xiaoxiao had shredded his notice. He was penniless and homeless, yet, strangely enough, he didn't panic. The hardest step had already been taken. The rest was merely paperwork. He could explain things to the school and get a new notice. He could get a temporary ID from the station and apply for student loans to cover his tuition. These were all solvable problems. The only thing that couldn't be fixed was the toxicity of his family, and he had finally cut that away with his own hands. After obtaining a temporary ID, he used his last bit of money to buy a train ticket to Bayan. It was a modest start, to be sure. By the time he boarded the train, it was already evening. The setting sun spilled across the seats as he leaned against the window. Watching the landscape blur past, he felt a sense of lightness he had never known. This, he realized, was what freedom felt like. He closed his eyes and drifted off. It was the most peaceful sleep he'd had in years. No nightmares, no sudden jolts of fear. There was only a long, gentle darkness. When he finally woke up, the train had reached its destination, Bayan Station. Dragging his meager luggage onto the platform, he saw a city that looked nothing like his small, suffocating hometown. The air carried a different scent, the smell of hope, of a future, and of a brand new life. And so, he went to find a place to stay. He settled into the cheapest hostel he could find and immediately contacted the university to explain his situation. After hearing his story, the admissions officer was genuinely shocked and promised to handle it quickly, telling him not to worry. 3 days later, he finally held the replacement admission notice. The brand new red cover looked exactly like the previous one, but its meaning was entirely different. Lin Feng pressed the notice against his chest, standing before the school gates. Looking up at the plaque reading, Bayan University, his eyes suddenly grew misty. To be honest, it had been a long road. Since his earliest memories, he had been cast aside in the countryside, ignored, neglected, and treated like a ghost. He thought he would spend his entire life living in Xiaoxiao's shadow, serving as her permanent stepping stone. But now, he was standing here, relying entirely on his own strength. He stood at the entrance of the country's top institution, with no one behind him to drag him down. From this moment on, his life truly belonged to him. On the first day of school, we see him meet the roommates he had known only online. Li Sang was quite tall with dark skin, clearly an athlete. Chun Xian wore glasses and had a refined air, having been admitted through a prestigious competition. Then there was Wang Mo, a man of few words who seemed very reliable. The first thing they said when they saw him was, "Holy cow, you're the Lin Feng from that video. You're way more handsome in person." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. He told them he wasn't handsome, especially since the injuries on his face hadn't healed. Chun Xian leaned in to inspect the bruises, frowning at the sight. They had certainly hit him hard. Wang Mo said nothing, but he quietly pulled a tube of ointment from his bag and handed it over with a small smile. Lin Feng felt a wave of warmth in his heart as he thanked him. That night, the four of them sat in the dorm and talked for hours about the incident. They asked how the case was going. The police were still processing it, so the final results were unknown. Chun Xian let out a heavy sigh, remarking on how difficult it must have been. Wang Mo remained quiet, but he made sure to pour Lin Feng a glass of water. Eventually, the topic shifted away. They talked about majors, clubs, and their plans for the next 4 years, the kind of things ordinary students talk about. He suddenly realized that this was what a normal life felt like. This was what being 18 was supposed to be. That night, lying in his dorm bed, he listened to the rhythmic snoring of his roommates. Watching the moonlight through the window, he thought of his grandfather. He remembered the old man's words, that for a child from a poor family, studying was the only way out. Deep down, he knew he had finally made it. Lin Feng called Grandpa Lu to tell him he had arrived at school and that everything was fine. On the other end of the line, the old man was so happy he was at a loss for words, simply repeating how proud he was of him. He didn't mention any of the recent chaos, fearing it would worry him. Instead, he spoke of the beautiful campus and the delicious cafeteria food. Grandpa Lu listened happily, telling him to focus on his studies and not to worry about an old man who was still feeling quite healthy. Lying back on his bed, Lin Feng vowed that once he was capable, he would bring Grandpa to live with him. It was a debt of gratitude he intended to pay. University life soon settled into a steady rhythm of military training, classes, and clubs. It was busy, fulfilling, and exactly what he needed. He threw himself into his studies and competitions, desperate to prove his worth and make up for all the time he had lost. A month later, we see him receive a notice from the police station. His father had been sentenced to 3 months of criminal detention for illegal imprisonment and intentional injury, with a 6-month reprieve. His mother, as an accomplice, received 15 days of administrative detention, while Lin Xiaoxiao was fined for destroying property. The sentences weren't particularly heavy, but for them, the consequences were already enough. That viral video had utterly destroyed their reputations. His father lost his job, and his mother couldn't even leave the house without neighbors pointing fingers. As for Lin Xiaoxiao, her name had become a laughingstock online. The combination of her poor grades and tearing up her brother's notice was enough to haunt her forever. Word reached him that she eventually suffered a mental breakdown and was sent to see a psychologist. To be honest, he didn't care to know the details. They tried to contact him through calls and texts, begging for forgiveness, asking him to drop the charges or to delete the video. He ignored them all. Eventually, they seemed to give up hope and went silent. That past was like a drawer he had locked away and never intended to reopen. The days turned into years. Freshman, sophomore, and junior year passed by. His grades remained consistently in the top 3 of his major. He won scholarships, joined the party, and even published 2 research papers. Everyone around him said that Lin Feng had a limitless future ahead of him. He would smile modestly, but deep down, he knew these achievements were earned through sheer desperation. Every late night and every moment of exhaustion was simply a way to put more distance between himself and the mud of his past. During the summer of his junior year, he returned home to visit Grandpa Lu. The old man had aged significantly. His back was more hunched and his hair was snow white, yet his spirit soared the moment he saw his grandson. They sat in the courtyard just like when he was a child. The old man peeled peanuts while Lin Feng shared stories of school under the warm, dappled sunlight. As the shadows stretched across the ground, Grandpa Lu suddenly asked if he still had any contact with his parents. He simply replied that he didn't. The old man fell silent for a moment before sighing, noting that no matter how poorly they had acted, they were still the ones who gave him life. Lin Feng told him he understood, but some wounds run too deep for simple forgiveness. Grandpa didn't push the matter further. He told the boy he wouldn't force him, saying it was enough that he had his own path. As long as he was happy, the old man was content. That night, we see him lying on the earthen bed of the old house, just as he did as a child, though his state of mind had changed completely. The insects outside were as noisy as ever, yet he felt a profound sense of peace. This was his only true home. Grandpa was his only real family. The others had long since died in his heart. By his senior year, he had successfully secured a spot for graduate school. He chose to stay at Bain University for his master's while receiving internship offers from several prestigious companies. Everything was moving in the right direction. On graduation day, dressed in his academic robes, he stood at the school gate and asked a roommate to take a photo of him. The background was the same Bain University sign from 4 years ago, but the person standing before it was entirely different. He was no longer the bruised and battered boy of the past. He had grown taller, stronger, and the gloom in his eyes had been replaced by confidence. The scars remained, but they had healed into reminders of the road he had traveled. His friend, Li Sang, threw an arm around his shoulder. He asked what the plan was. Lin Feng intended to finish his master's, get a job, and finally bring Grandpa Lu to live with him. His friends cheered the idea, and that night, the 4 roommates drank together, celebrating the bond they had formed. They talked late into the night about the past and the future until they all fell asleep. The next morning brought a headache, but a full heart. And just like that, his undergraduate years came to a close. A new journey was beginning, and his life as a graduate student proved even busier. Between research, classes, and internships, there was hardly time to breathe, yet he found joy in the constant motion. Every busy day felt like another step away from his former self. Then, during the winter of his second year, Grandpa Lu passed away peacefully in his sleep. The villagers called with the news while he was working in the lab. In that moment, the equipment in his hands felt suddenly, terribly heavy. The test tube shattered on the floor. He requested leave and rushed back to his hometown overnight, only to find a coffin waiting in the main hall. Grandpa Lu lay inside, wearing the dark green cotton coat Lin Feng had bought him, his face holding a faint, lingering trace of a smile. He knelt before the coffin, making no sound, though his tears flowed uncontrollably. The elders called it a joyous funeral, a celebration of a long life. They said living past 80 and seeing a grandson succeed meant he was a blessed man. But Lin Feng didn't want a joyous funeral. He simply wanted a few more years, time to work, earn money, and bring the old man to a big house in the city for fine meals. He hadn't had the chance to do any of it before the old man left. On the snowy day of the funeral, he buried the ashes on the hillside. From there, one could see the entire village and the old locust tree. He stood there until the snow turned his shoulders white, whispering to the wind. He promised his grandfather that he would stand tall and make him proud from the heavens. The wind scattered his words, but he knew they were heard. After settling the affairs, he returned to school, burying his grief deep within to work and study with even more desperate intensity. He had to succeed. There was no other option now. Eventually, he chose a position at a tech giant with a starting salary of 500,000, a figure a village boy could once only dream of. On his first day, we see him standing beneath the grand office building, looking up at the blue sky and thinking, "Grandpa, I did it." Once he started working, he rented a clean, modest one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't large, but it was a nest of his own. He placed Grandpa Lu's photo on his desk, greeting him every morning and sharing the day's events every evening upon his return. Such a life was lonely, perhaps, but it felt solid. 3 years later, he finally bought his own apartment in Bain. With a 30-year mortgage and heavy monthly payments, the pressure was significant, but he could carry it. The 2-bedroom flat was enough. On moving day, he stood by the window watching the bustling traffic below, and his mind drifted back to a scene from many years ago. He remembered the boy locked in a dark storage room, a boy who never dreamed he would one day own a home in this city. He now had a respectable job, a few true friends, and a brand new life. It was a complete transformation, really. Fate had dealt him the worst possible hand, yet he had played it into a victory. That night, sitting alone in his new home, he drank a little wine and spoke to his grandfather's photo, saying that Grandpa Lu was right. Education really was the only way out for a poor child. He had finally made it. Outside, the moonlight was bright, just as it had been on a summer night many years ago. The nights when Grandpa sat under the old locust tree telling him stories felt like they were only yesterday. Life continued peacefully after that. Work went smoothly, and he occasionally met with old roommates. Life was simple but fulfilling until the day that peace was shattered. It was a weekend during his 4th year of work. While he was reading at home, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. After a moment's hesitation, he answered. On the other end was the aged, trembling voice of a woman asking if he was Lin Feng. When he confirmed his identity, the person on the other end fell silent before saying something that shook him to his core. "I am your grandmother." To him, the word grandmother was so foreign he had almost forgotten he even had such a relative. She asked if he could come to the hospital. She told him his mother wasn't going to make it. He remained silent for a long time, his mind a complete blank as her voice continued. With a sob in her voice, she admitted she knew how badly they had treated him, but pleaded with him nonetheless. She was still his mother, the woman said, and she only had one breath left. She wanted to see him one last time. He asked what was wrong. It was late-stage liver cancer, and by the time it was discovered, it had already spread. The doctor said she only had a few days. He leaned back on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what to even say. 7 years had passed since that incident. He hadn't seen them, called them, or sent a single text in all that time. He had assumed their lives would never intersect again, never imagining this would be the reason for their reunion. He told her to send the address. After hanging up, he sat on the sofa for a long time as a chaotic flood of memories returned. He remembered the days locked in that room, the nights of being beaten, and the shredded admission letter. Those wounds had long since scarred over. Yet at this moment, they began to ache again. The question of whether to go haunted him all day, but finally, he made a decision. He would go, not out of forgiveness, but to finally put a period on that chapter of his past. The next day, he took leave and drove to the hospital. We see him arrive at the city hospital and find the ward. The moment he pushed the door open, he saw the woman lying in the hospital bed. We see the mother on the bed, thin beyond recognition, her face sallow and her skin clinging tightly to her bones. "You're here," the grandmother whispered. "It's good you came. She's been calling for you." Lin Feng said nothing, simply standing by the bedside. He looked down at the dying woman. His mother opened her eyes, her cloudy gaze finally settling on his face. Her lips trembled as she managed a weak sound. "Xiaofeng." Tears suddenly welled in her eyes, trickling down her dry, shriveled cheeks. She tried to reach for him, but lacked the strength, her hand merely shaking. "You're here. You actually came to see me," she breathed. He didn't answer, standing there with a heart that felt strangely, perhaps even unnervingly, calm. There was no burning hatred, no sharp grief, only a profound, hollow numbness. His mother's voice was strained, as if being squeezed from her throat. "Xiaofeng, Mom is so sorry. All these years, I wanted to find you. I wanted to apologize, but I was simply too ashamed to face you." A fit of coughing seized her. The grandmother rushed to pat her back, while Lin Feng remained a silent observer, unmoving. His mother gasped. For a long time before recovering, "I've made so many mistakes," she continued, "but my greatest regret is how I treated you. I was always so biased toward your sister, leaving you alone in the countryside. I've been a terrible mother." She became more agitated, but she seemed to be summoning every ounce of her remaining strength to stare at him, her eyes pleading and desperate. "Xiaofeng, can you forgive me? No, I don't deserve it, but I want to hear you call me Mom, just once before I go." The ward became terrifyingly silent, save for the rhythmic, mechanical beeping of the monitors. He looked at her, the woman who gave him life, but never her love. Seeing her so withered and broken, a wave of complex emotions washed over him. Did he still hate her? He certainly had. He remembered the nights locked in the storage room, the years of being invisible, and the moment his dreams were torn to shreds. But in this moment, he realized that those old memories no longer held the same power over him. His hatred had long since faded, not because he had forgiven her, but because he simply no longer cared. He finally spoke, his voice remarkably calm. "I don't hate you anymore." She froze, but he knew he couldn't offer forgiveness. He continued, "You asked if I could call you Mom, but I simply cannot. For all these years, there has never been a place for a mother in my heart. There was only my grandfather." His mother's body trembled violently, as if the last thread of her strength had been severed. She opened her mouth to speak, but only broken, ragged sobs escaped. The grandmother, growing desperate, grabbed his hand and pleaded, "Xiaofeng, please, just say it once. Let her go in peace," she begged, but he merely shook his head and turned to leave. As he reached the door, his mother's hoarse cry echoed behind him. "Xiaofeng, I was wrong. Mom was truly wrong." He paused for a few seconds without looking back, then pushed the door open and walked out. The corridor was silent as he leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His heart was racing, yet he felt no regret. He sat on a bench outside for a long time, smoking half a pack of cigarettes while watching the people pass by. Some entered crying, others left smiling. Life and death were just like that. Then his phone rang. It was his grandmother. After a moment's hesitation, he answered. Her voice sounded exhausted. "Xiaofeng, don't blame me for calling you here. Your mother really is fading. I know what they did in the past was wrong," she admitted, but she truly regretted it. For years, she never stopped talking about you. He remained silent, offering no words of comfort. The grandmother continued, explaining that his mother's illness was tied to the guilt she kept bottled up inside. After the events of those years, she never had a single night of peaceful sleep. Your father lost his job and turned to drinking every day to drown his sorrows. The two of them fought constantly, and then there was the matter of your sister. In short, the family was completely shattered. When he asked what had become of Lin Xiaoxiao, the grandmother fell silent for a long moment. "Don't even mention it," she finally said. "That child is ruined." After the scandal caused such a stir back then, her mental state suffered a severe shock. It only grew worse over time, and now she is confined to a psychiatric hospital. Whether she is doing well or not, he felt nothing. He felt no sense of satisfaction, nor any pity. It seemed to him that this was simply the natural unfolding of karma. "Xiaofeng, I know you harbor resentment," the grandmother sighed, "but your mother truly doesn't have much time left. Can't you just go see her one last time?" the grandmother pleaded. Xiaofeng replied that he had already seen her, and that was all he could do. On the other end of the line, the grandmother began to weep, asking how he could be so cold-hearted. But it wasn't a matter of being cold. His heart had simply been broken by them long ago. He suggested she should ask them instead how they had treated him back then. The grandmother fell silent. After a long pause, she sighed and admitted she wouldn't force him anymore. He had his own life now, and that was enough. After hanging up, he sat on the bench for a while longer before driving home. 3 days later, the grandmother called again to say his mother had passed away, still murmuring his name at the very end. He simply acknowledged the news and asked about the funeral. It was set for the day after tomorrow, and he promised he would be there. Standing by the window that night, he looked out at the city lights, feeling a complex mix of emotions, perhaps a hint of bitterness. But mostly, he felt relief. The woman who gave him life was gone, yet he felt no grief, only a sense of finality. It was like reaching the last page of a book. No matter how terrible the story was, at least it had finally ended. On the day of the funeral, we see him standing in the crowd, looking at his mother's portrait from 7 years ago. Back then, she wasn't sick yet, and her face still wore that familiar, harsh smile. Only a few distant relatives and his grandparents attended. And then, someone appeared whom he hadn't expected, his father. The man had aged terribly, his hair white and his frame stooped. He looked as if he had shrunken, standing there in mourning clothes with a blank expression. When he saw Xiao Feng, his eyes flickered. He seemed to want to say something, but ultimately looked down and continued burning incense. Xiao Feng ignored him, following the ritual in silence. He offered the incense, bowed, and then retreated to a quiet corner. Xiao Feng, it's good you came, the grandmother whispered. She told him his mother could now rest in peace. He gave a short grunt of acknowledgement as the guests began to leave. Soon, only the closest family remained. His father was still kneeling, the firelight reflecting off his weathered, old face. Looking at that silhouette, Xiao Feng felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the man who had once been so overbearing and violent. The man who had beaten him and locked him away now knelt there, looking like a defeated dog. He likely realized his time was also coming. Sensing his gaze, the man turned to look at him, his eyes red and swollen as his lips trembled, whispering Xiao Feng's name. Xiao Feng didn't respond, merely watching him in silence as the man stood up and stumbled toward him with unsteady steps. As he drew closer, the faint scent of alcohol became clear. He stammered an apology, claiming he had wanted to find his son for years. He claimed he wanted to apologize but felt he had no right to show his face, especially now that the mother was gone. This man, whom Xiao Feng had once hated with every fiber of his being, now stood before him as humble and broken as a stray dog. Xiao Feng finally spoke, his voice unervingly calm, telling his father that as a child, he could never understand one simple thing. He wondered why other parents loved their children while his own treated him like a burden, though he eventually found the answer. It wasn't that he was a bad child, it was simply that they were never fit to be parents. His father's face twitched at the words. It was as if he had been struck across the face. As for the question of forgiveness, Xiao Feng's answer remained unchanged. He no longer felt hatred, but he would never offer forgiveness, not in this lifetime, and certainly not now. The father froze as tears streamed down his face, reaching out to grab Xiao Feng's arm, only for his son to pull away. He declared that from this day forward, they were strangers. Life, death, or illness, none of it would concern the other ever again. This was the final meeting. Without a backward glance, he turned to leave, ignoring his father's wailing and his grandmother's desperate calls. He walked out of the funeral hall and away from that suffocating place, finally starting his engine to leave it all behind. As he drove onto the highway back to Bayan, the night was deep and the road was empty, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He remembered being abandoned in the countryside at 12, treated like a ghost at 16, and locked away at 18. He thought of his admission letter being torn to shreds by his sister, memories playing in his mind like a grim, flickering film. Now, at 29, he had a home, a car, and a career, a life he once hadn't dared to dream of. But what of them? His father was jobless and destitute, his mother was gone, and Lin Xiaoxiao had lost her mind. The family was utterly shattered. This wasn't his revenge, it was simply the harvest of the seeds they had sown. Halfway home, he pulled into a rest area. Standing in the night breeze, he looked up at the stars and suddenly remembered his grandfather sitting under the old locust tree telling stories. He recalled the old man's words, that education was the only way out for a poor child. He had finally made it, living the life his grandfather envisioned. His eyes grew misty, but he refused to let the tears fall, simply taking a deep breath before getting back into the car to continue his journey. By 3 in the morning, he was finally home. As he lay in bed watching the sky slowly brighten, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. All those old grudges, the complicated web of love and hatred, they all seemed to finally belong to the past. A little later, we see his career flourish as he was promoted to supervisor with a doubled salary. That same year, he met a girl named Xiao Wanner. She was a designer from the neighboring department, beautiful with a smile that made her eyes curve like crescent moons. They grew close through a joint project. She eventually learned about his past, all those painful, unbearable memories, and yet, she chose to stay by his side.